everybody. We are here today exactly 1 month after the federal election to look at what the implications are of that election and of the incumbent being re-elected on our economy, on our businesses and on the planet. We are joined today by three speakers who have three probably slightly different lenses on this topic, which is obviously deliberate. We want to hear from all sides of the story. I have Wayne Smith, the Chief Advocacy Officer for the Smart Energy Council, which is our industry body. He'll be giving us a macro view and a broad industry perspective on what to expect in the near future. Then we have Lochie Burke, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of NetNada. He'll be discussing the connection between government policy and mandatory requirements for businesses. And then finally, our founder and MD, Huon Hoogesteger, who will be speaking on how you can take control of your energy situation in a changing grid. I was remiss in the early part of my introduction to not thank our sponsors, which is SIM-PAC. I have Jeff Matthews in the call, and apologies. SIM-PAC kindly sponsored this and helped us to get the word out to as many people as possible. It's sustainable industrial manufacturing. So I will hand over to Wayne to share his perspective on the election implications for the next 3 years on energy and ESG. Thanks, Wayne.
Hey, let me just begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you from Canberra, and I want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands in which I come from, the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also my respects to any Indigenous people that might be listening in today. Just for people's background, the Smart Energy Council is a peak body for the renewables industry in Australia. We cover everything from household solar and battery storage, large-scale renewables, commercial-scale renewables, which I'll talk a lot about, but also smart transport, the integration of electric vehicles into the energy grid, renewable hydrogen, green iron and green metals, and also doing a lot of work around solar and battery recycling and repurposing as well. In terms of some reflections on where we're at the moment, I want to start by just reflecting on the election that we've just had. Smart Energy Council strongly agreed with Peter Dutton when he said that the federal election was a sliding doors moment for Australia. When it comes to renewables, on one side of politics was absolutely committed to at least 82% renewables by 2030, at least a 43% reduction in emissions by 2030, and a whole range of really significant policies to help achieve that. The other side of politics wanted to cap renewables at 54% and actually wanted to get rid of a whole bunch of the key government policies that was actually driving decarbonisation and innovation in Australia. From a Smart Energy Council perspective, we're very pleased with the election result. This is not about one political party, but about one side of politics and the inevitability now of reform. It's most likely that federal Labor is certainly in for 3 years, maybe it's 6 years. The way things are going at the moment, it could be even longer than that. And what that means is that the energy transition is now inevitable. And some of the crazy ideas, including the $600 billion nuclear plan, will not come to fruition. That's really important. I think that provides a lot of certainty for investment. That's really a really important message here. I talked a bit about, I mentioned before that the federal government in particular is committed to at least 82% renewables by 2030. From a Smart Energy Council perspective, basically half that job is going to be done with rooftop solar and battery storage, and roughly half that job is going to be done with large-scale renewables. And so that leaves an interesting question about what happens with commercial-scale renewables, which is that kind of in-between bit, which Australia hasn't really latched onto in the way that it should have so far. We're already seeing significant problems with the rollout of large-scale renewables. There's issues around social licence concerns, some community opposition. There's challenges with planning decisions. There's challenges with accessing the grid and rolling out transmission. And we're also seeing some state governments, Queensland in particular now, actually starting to halt the rollout of large-scale renewables. And so that does raise some questions about whether or not we're going to get halfway there to 82% renewables with large-scale renewables. On the consumer energy side, we're seeing massive uptake of solar and battery storage in the homes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we're also seeing some challenges with the rollout of that, I think, as well. We're seeing regulators wanting to regulate it, and we're seeing feed-in tariffs being reduced and other things. And so that does present some challenges. And so my thesis is that increasingly the commercial scale solar and battery storage is going to be really important in the rollout and getting to 82% renewables. And I think making sure that the incentives are there to make that happen will be really important. Let me just talk a little bit, though, about some of the policy positions that are in place and what that might mean for sort of commercial scale solar and storage. Let me start, I guess, with large-scale renewables. And so there's some really significant government programs. There's the Capacity Investment Scheme, which is the major driver now of large-scale renewables, solar farms and wind farms. Rewiring the Nation, which is all about transmission. Future Made in Australia, which is a $25 billion program to encourage smart energy manufacturing in Australia, and green iron and green metals. And when we talk about green iron, green metals, and green hydrogen, the green is renewables. And so all of those programs provide opportunities, certainly for the renewables industry and for investment in that space. One of the things we haven't seen yet is whether or not the Capacity Investment Scheme might be a mechanism to unlock investment in what we call commercial scale solar and storage. And so that's really investment by businesses, particularly around rooftop solar, backed up with energy storage. There's likely to be much more of an opportunity in the future for commercial scale battery storage integrated into what's called virtual power plants to provide a much greater amount of storage into the system. I think that's going to happen. So the Capacity Investment Scheme is locked in until 2030, but it's based around individual funding rounds. And so we don't know what those funding rounds or those tenders are going to look like next year or the year after or the year after. And I think it's really important that the industry, all these people on this call, and the Smart Energy Council actually urge the federal government to look at the opportunities to use the Capacity Investment Scheme to unlock investment in commercial scale solar and battery storage, and particularly integrating that into a much larger energy system. When it comes to Future Made in Australia, again, there's opportunities there for the commercial scale solar and storage industry to have a look at that and look at how it might play a role in decarbonising heavier industry as well. So I want to flag that as well. When it comes to consumer energy, so rooftop solar and battery storage, the primary scheme is the federal government's renewable energy target, and specifically a scheme that's called the Small Scale Renewable Energy Scheme. At the moment, that's capped at 100 kilowatts of solar. But the federal government's also now announced a cheaper home batteries program, which begins on the 1st of July. That's going to be phenomenally important and really, I think, genuinely successful in driving investment firstly in home batteries, but also in battery storage in smaller businesses. So here's the important thing, Lauren, I think that everyone needs to know, is that the Cheaper Home Batteries program, the federal government scheme, will provide effectively a 30% discount on batteries up to 50 kilowatt hours. Now, you can install up to 100 kilowatt hours, which is a pretty substantial system, but it's only the first 50 kilowatt hours that gets the subsidy from the federal government, the 30% subsidy. Now, those subsidies may, in some circumstances, be stacked on top of state subsidies as well. You've got to check the details around that. And so the federal government's been very deliberate about this. We've worked, Smart Energy Council has worked very closely with the federal government in the development of this policy, and we're working very closely with them on the implementation of this policy. And the reason why the federal government's talking about up to 50 kilowatt hours is because they want to see small businesses and not-for-profit organisations, charities, etc., actually installing battery storage. Fantastic opportunity to really slash your power bills with solar and storage. And so it comes into force on the 1st of July, but people can buy batteries now. They can install batteries now. You just can't switch them onto the energy grid until the 1st of July. Really significant program. Really encourage everyone to understand the details around that. If you want more information, reach out to the Smart Energy Council and to Lauren and to others. We're here to help in relation to that. So then it gets interesting, right? So what happens beyond that program? The small-scale renewable energy scheme, as I mentioned before, is already capped at 100 kilowatt hours. There's a very strong argument for increasing that to up to 1 megawatt and really unlocking that investment in solar and small business. I'd really encourage that. And I urge everyone on this call to get much more active in advocating for exactly that sort of policy. And then probably just finally, electric vehicles are coming. Electric vehicles are batteries on wheels, and there are extraordinary opportunities there. I would expect that over the course of this term of government, the federal government, if the Cheaper Home Batteries program is successful, I'd expect the federal government to start thinking about whether or not it can be extended to include electric vehicle charging. And so vehicle to home charging, for example, and providing incentives for that, potentially electric vehicle charging in small businesses as well, and providing incentives for that to help build a much stronger energy grid and to help businesses save money on their power bills. Lauren, that's just some reflections from me. I hope that's helpful and very happy to take any questions and comments.
Thanks a lot, Wayne. Wayne, how easy do you make my job following you? I mean, you really set the context there perfectly. And I think what shines true out of what you just said is there are so many opportunities for businesses, and we have over 100 people here in this webinar, which is incredible. There's so many opportunities for businesses of all shapes and sizes as these policies align with the legislation come into effect. And I think the opportunities are very important to keep your eyes on, but I'm here to talk also about some of the considerations from a risk perspective, some of the considerations from a compliance perspective, and what businesses need to know when they're looking at their own data analytics and when they're looking at their own potential mandatory disclosures or reporting to key stakeholders. So I'm Lochie, as Lauren mentioned, and I'm the co-CEO at NetNada. And at NetNada, we specialise in helping companies with their mandatory reporting, their compliance, and their overall data analytics for their ESG. So as a starting point, everyone, I'm going to chat to you guys about the mandatory disclosures, understanding what all of these things are. Don't worry, I'll unpack the acronyms and then dive into how we utilise all this information to start making really good decisions. How do you use your carbon data to leverage your decision making, looking at, what the synergies and crossovers are from accurate emissions data to driving really good decisions around capital expenditure, and then looking at what are those pathways that Wayne touched on before towards our decarbonisation goals. The net zero strategy from the government is very, very clear. Also, 2030 is very, very close. Wayne rightfully pointed out, we have a 43% reduction target for 2030, and we have an 82% target for renewables in the grid. And that's coming around quite quick, obviously, before our broader 2050 net zero target. All of this, when you're working with your key stakeholders, whether it is government or whether it's your customers or whether it's your internal team, is about building trust. And we build trust with transparency. And we're confident on our transparency with good data. That's the way we approach this. So that everyone's across all the terminology, a few key terms. Firstly, ASRS is our Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards. These are the standards that are setting out what companies need to be reporting when we're talking about our climate risks and our overall sustainability. Okay, so that's our ASRS. AASB, and there's AASB S1 and S2, which I'll come to, but AASB is the Australian Accounting Standards Board. And this is the body that's setting out standards like the ASRS. Okay, so think of them as they sit above the ASRS. And then jumping just into the scopes of emissions, and I'm sure everyone here is familiar with this or has at least started to hear about it. We typically break our emissions down from a carbon accounting perspective into 3 scopes. Scope 1 is where we look at our greenhouse gas emissions directly from our fuel that is burned and consumed within our organisation. Scope 2 is where we look at our energy consumption, obviously a huge part of today's talking points, and why renewables are so important to reduce our Scope 2 as well. And then Scope 3 is where things get quite a bit more tricky. We're looking at entire supply chains, all of the different impacts that are generated within those supply chains and the greenhouse gas emission equivalents that are created. We have the safeguard mechanism as well. So that's a federal scheme which our big emitters sit within, and I'm sure there are plenty of people in the room here today who sit within the safeguard mechanism. And then last thing I want to point out here is we've spoken about net zero, but I also want to point out carbon neutral. It's very, very common that people will get net zero and carbon neutral mixed up. So the definitions that are important to keep in mind, net zero is where we're talking about removing this. We're not creating an emission, right? We've got a completely renewable, clean process. Carbon neutral is where we're balancing out the greenhouse gas emissions that we're generating, right? Of course, reducing where we can, but then also purchasing carbon credits to offset the rest. So there is a difference in the 2 definitions there. Now, with that said, under the Australian mandatory climate disclosures and the reporting, we have 3 groups of companies. Now, you'll know roughly what group your company sits within. Group 1 companies, $500 million of revenue or more, $1 billion of consolidated assets, and or over 500 employees. So if your business ticks 2 out of the 3, then you sit in Group 1. And for our Group 1 companies here, I'm sure you're well and truly underway with your preparations for your mandatory reporting. Group 2, as you can see in this table, 200 million or more of revenue, 500 million or more of consolidated assets, and over 250 employees. And Group 3 drops down quite a lot, 50 million or more of revenue, $25 million or more of consolidated assets, and over 100 employees. So what we can see here, and whether you fit in Group 1, 2, or 3, or neither, or none, what we can see here is in a phased approach, more and more companies are going to be affected. And what is also required is they are then going to be required to get this same information from their suppliers and their contractors and their entire supply chain. So we're seeing a real ripple effect that's occurring. And what we're seeing is the most important thing, one of the key takeaways that I want you to leave with is make sure, even if you don't have to report, that the way you are structuring your reporting, the way that you're gathering your data, the way that you're setting it up so that it's all auditable and assurable aligns with that of your key stakeholders who are likely these sorts of groups of companies who are reporting for mandatory purposes. Jumping down into the structures, as I mentioned before, ASB S1 is voluntary, where ASB S2 is mandatory. And when we think about mandatory climate reporting, it's very, very easy to jump straight to carbon emissions. Yes, I understand that. Energy consumption, my environmental impacts, and to think that that's the lion's share of this whole piece. But in fact, out of 200 criteria points in the entire AASB S2 reporting standards, only 8 of that 200 is our metrics and targets, which is where we're looking at carbon emissions and things like that. 192 of these points are governance. How are we setting up processes? How are we making sure that there are controls in place? How are we making sure that all of our senior leadership are across everything. Our risk management, we spoke a lot about the opportunities that Wayne outlined, and they are fantastic, but equally we have to be looking at the risks. We have to be looking at our physical risks to our assets. What happens in certain climate-related extreme weather events? What happens from a transitional risk perspective is we see changes in legislation, changes in command, these things. How are we planning around that? And then lastly, the strategy. A huge part of the mandatory reporting is making sure that all the processes and the decision making and the logics behind each of these areas is considered and is clearly documented how those decisions were made, by who, and how those people were informed. And it's a huge, huge part of the goal of the mandatory reporting is not just hitting and helping companies to align with these net zero targets, but it is also the upskilling piece. And so a question I'd ask to you is, internally, you may have an ESG group, and you, of course, will have a board, and start to think about where your gap analysis may sit, where your strengths and weaknesses may be from those internal teams on their understanding of these policies, because that's a huge area where improving the education internally it must be aligned with this. I'll go down into the assurance pathway, which is the sort of phased approach that we're going to have over the next few years. Of course, in the first year, we're going to have limited assurance on most of these areas, right? But we'll move into a reasonable assurance. And there's, of course, just a higher level of audit and scrutiny that each of your data points get put under. But, of course, it just speaks to the point here in the disclosures that setting things up for success moving forward, and even if you're a Group 2 or a Group 3 company, starting to use these couple of years you have in advance as a bit of a dry run, an opportunity to plan and prepare, continuously improve your data and your processes. Now, jumping into carbon data for decisions. And as I spoke about at the start, looking at how do we use this data to better drive decisions around energy and around expenditure. The best thing about carbon data is that it'll give you a holistic picture of your impacts across your whole environmental, all of your environmental impacts. And it'll put your energy in context with your waste and your recycling. It'll put your energy in context with the things you consume in your supply chain. And that'll enable you to look at where you can move the big ticket items. Now, starting with energy and considering that under the mandatory reporting, scope 1 and 2 are two of the areas that are mandatory from the start. So the best thing you can possibly be doing is looking at how you can reduce your scope 1 and 2. As mentioned before, there's never been a better time than now to be looking at reducing your scope 2 in particular. But what you want to be looking at is mapping out what percentage of your total carbon footprint does your scope 1 and your scope 2 and your scope 3 represent, and what are the strategies that you can implement that are going to have the biggest impact to start with. The thing we always say is, let's not try and boil the ocean here. Let's break this strategy down. Let's make it phased and easy to achieve. And normally where we would say the best place to start is definitely with your energy. Now, coming past into the decarb pathways point, I think it's really, really important to use some examples here. We hear a lot about do this, do that, but I think it's always helpful to actually point to real world examples where it's occurring. Fortescue, Coles and Woolies and Goodman are the three examples I've taken here. Now, whether it's changing your fleet, electrifying your trucks, investing in new areas of innovation like green hydrogen, or whether it's doing store-wide, facility-wide lighting upgrades, solar and storage, is really down to your business. But what I would recommend is look at what the leaders are doing, not just here in Australia, but also across in Europe. The biggest benefit we have here in Australia is following the ASB. We're actually just following the International Sustainability Standards Board and what's already occurred in Europe. So if you have companies that you admire and that are in your industry and in your space and hold similarities to you, I would encourage you highly to look at what they've reported on in Europe and how you can replicate some of the actions that they've taken over there as well. And now the last point before I get cut off by Lauren, because I know I'm going very close to time, but this whole piece, as I said at the start, is about making sure we have apples to apples comparisons when we're reporting. And the best way we can do that is by being sure on our data so that we can be transparent in how we're doing our calculations and how we're doing our reporting. And so that then we're building trust with our key stakeholders through our disclosures, through our certifications, and through our reporting. And so that's with that in mind, I would just highly recommend that you get familiar with the key reporting standards and frameworks and make sure that any methodology that's being followed is a recognized third-party framework that has not just been maybe created internally or pulled together. Think of this like your tax and your compliance. And, of course, you wouldn't just make up a way to do your taxes this year. You're following the ATO structure. The takeaway here is make sure when you're reporting to a framework and a compliance standard that your key stakeholders are also reporting. That's all from me, and I welcome any questions.
Yeah, such a pleasure to speak with you all, and thank you very much, Wayne and Lochie, for contributing your valuable insights to this conversation. And we went through our own process with NetNada, who made that carbon baseline reporting for us very palatable, surprisingly easier than we expected, and great products. But really, what's going to happen over the next few years, policies, positions and strategies, I would say that the next 3 years in terms of energy are going to be much more important or more significant than the last 10 that we've had. There's a lot happening, but a lot needs to happen. And whilst I'm sensitive to the political environment and everyone's got a view on politics and particularly energy because it touches everyone, we are in this situation. The reality is that regardless of our views, we exist in this political and policy environment. So let's make the use of it. So I'll say it now and at the end as well. You need to take control of your own energy situation as much as possible. As Wayne said, Albo said in 2022, we're going to achieve 82% renewables by 2030. That's pretty ambitious. Even if we hit it, the transition certainly won't be seamless. We're already seeing grid instability and rising prices during peak periods because the renewable capacity isn't keeping up with coal closures. It's kind of a bit of chicken and the egg type of situation. It's either we have too much renewables or not enough. We're kind of in this middle area. And the cost is really who fills the gap in that transition. So the opportunity for business to step in and take control not only of their own energy destiny, but also to participate in this transition and indeed actually make money out of it. But to put 82% renewables into perspective, we have just tipped 40%. And, I've been working in solar for 17, 18 years now. 13.4% of our energy in the grid is now coming from wind. 12.4 is coming from rooftop solar, 7.2 from solar farms, 5.5% from hydrogen, hydrogen, and there's some biogas. But as I said, we're only 40%. Now, to double that in the next 5 years is going to take a monumental effort. I would doubt that we will get there. But one thing is certain, that coal's out. Coal's no longer, it's neither economic, nor does it have a social license. And this is not an ideological statement. The fact that coal's exiting is based on economics and the reality of its infrastructure. And as I said, we're kind of not got enough renewables. And so the system's becoming a little bit brittle because supply is tightening, it's more intermittent, therefore prices spike and reliability is suffering. We bought a little bit of time with Eraring pushing out for a bit longer, but over the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to see Collide B, Yallourn, Vales Point, and then Eraring shut down, which basically represent about 20% of the energy supply in our grid. So we will see more volatility. My bet is that some of these power stations will be paid to stay on. To put that in perspective, New South Wales government paid $1 billion last year to keep Eraring going, and that's all in the name of reliability. What does it mean for your business? What does it mean for the businesses that you work with? Well, increased volatility isn't just a headline. It's now a risk that you will wear. Even homes will wear it. So forward energy contracts are going to get much more expensive, and spot market spikes will happen more frequently, and there's a real potential for true interruption to the quality of power that we've been used to. The smart businesses are already shifting their mindset, and they're going to be installing solar and batteries. A lot of companies already have, joining virtual power plants or virtual energy networks and turning energy into a competitive advantage rather than, the old saying that change either happens to you or by you. So fast-moving businesses are getting on board. And what this means is that they're making a bit more money. Do you think Australia is in a safe position? If you took what happened in Spain and Portugal the other day, think again. Australia's enjoyed 100 years of very stable politics and very good energy supply. But, Spain and Portugal had very good energy supply and they went down for a week and it caused absolute chaos. It's not inconceivable that that could happen here. They had feeds from France and Morocco. In Australia, we have feeds from Australia. So we really need businesses to be thinking about energy resilience. Everything else, lower emissions and better returns, flows on from that. So when we talk about, which we'll talk about now, basically keeping your business running no matter what, regardless of what's happening on the grid. And it's about staying productive during blackouts, avoiding price shocks, and basically having control and not dependence on the grid. One thing I think is really interesting is that a lot of businesses don't actually calculate how much it costs them when the grid goes down. Now, 1 hour every now and then, maybe not such a big issue. You just have to reset a few computers. But if it's happening regularly, or if it goes down for 3 hours, what's the cost on your business? Now, your staff are going home, they're cleaning out machinery. What happens if it goes down for 8 hours? What if it's a Spain incident where it goes down for 3 or 4 days? The cost implications on your business are massive. So a business can not only help you with a business can not only buy a battery to help in those high price market events, you can actually participate and play into them. And that's why energy resilience, I believe, isn't a luxury anymore. It's going to be a necessity. So solar, batteries, microgrids, they give the business that buffer and basically restore control. This volatility that I talk about, it represents a value for your business. These volatile market events are really where supply and demand are not perfectly matched, and they exist. They are market. They exist actually to drive investment into energy. And what's happening over the next 3 years is that the market price cap, which is the peak amount of power, peak price that wholesalers and retailers can pay for energy, is moving from $16,000 a megawatt hour up to 22. So about a 40% price increase to the market price cap. This will flow into the cost of energy. Then there's a cumulative price threshold, which is basically the rolling 7-day average of price. That's moving from a maximum of $124,000 to $193,000 for that rolling 7-day average. That's going to increase price. And then there's this sort of administered price cap, which also doubles. So it goes from $300 to $600. That's basically to protect retailers from sustained long-term high-priced market events like we had in 2021 and 22. Otherwise, everyone passes on to the consumer their full prices, and no one can afford to pay their energy bill anymore. But these price caps are moving up to stimulate new investment. Ultimately, consumers of energy will pay for it. Now that represents an opportunity, or if you don't do anything about it, a significant cost. Put that in perspective for a business. If you're paying 20 cents a kilowatt hour and there's a high price market event where it goes to $16 a kilowatt hour, how long does a retailer have to sell you energy to pay for that cost difference between what they're retailing it to you for and what they bought it for? It takes 800 times, 800 kilowatt hours to pay for that one moment at high price market. So as I said, it's not just risk management anymore. It's going to be revenue generation, and businesses can already see, and I'll show you how, sort of 6-figure returns on investment from using batteries. the smart operators basically aren't just reacting, they're going to make use of this opportunity. You would have heard about the new home battery, and it's not just business obviously taking it. We're not just aware of it, but obviously the government's very concerned about this, because there's no way that we can get to 80% renewables without a significant investment in storage. Storage allows us to smooth out the highs and lows of renewable energy, which is intermittent. And so they've come out with the new home battery rebate. And it's welcome, but it's not a fix. To put that in perspective, we are hitting the edge of what the grid can actually carry. The daytime cost of energy is quite often going below zero on the spot market. So we're seeing that the grid can no longer take a huge amount more energy out of renewables without that storage coming in. Now, $2.3 billion into the home battery systems will stimulate about $10 billion worth of actual spending in batteries. The reality is we probably need to spend about $100 billion into the national energy market, I would say at least. Now, we need probably at minimum 50 gigawatt hours, preferably 50 gigawatts and 100 gigawatt hours of storage. For every gigawatt hour is basically $1 billion. And I know these are big numbers that I'm using and lots of zeros, but there are people doing it. And ultimately, this is actually a land grab. There is a finite amount of storage required at this point in time. And actually, I think over the next 5 years, anyone getting in now will make a lot of money out of this. The early adopters will be trading into these high price market events with batteries more often, and they'll achieve a really good financial outcome. But after that major investment has taken place, the daytime highs and lows will somewhat be smoothed out because of the amount of batteries that are in the market, and then the relative value will be taken up. So, as I said, it's a bit of a land grab. If you can, you would move now, you get your 5-year break even, and then you can make use of the future. How do we do that? Well, we've built Smart Stack. This is basically how we unlock the value from batteries. It's not just about storing solar and using it at night. As I said, we can play into energy arbitrage. That means we buy low on the midday market where the price is negative $1,000. We get paid to charge the battery, and we sell into the high price nighttime event. We get paid for FCAS. We get paid for demand charge reduction. We get paid for peak shaving and more. And this is not able to be done, not very well physically. We actually have an AI algorithm that's stacking real-time pricing and demand forecasts, and then making an algorithm to trade or buy, trade out or buy in energy into a battery. And so if you were to invest $1 million into a battery, your returns are something like $270,000 a year. So it's an incredibly good return, but it's volatile. It's all based. It's effectively businesses taking a hedge against the grid performing well, and that's what we're providing to businesses so that they can participate in that market. As we think about what that means, I mean, businesses do things to make money. Businesses do things for the right reason as well. And there is a lot of noise about net zero, but it really does come down to action and down to controlling your load, controlling your cost, and controlling your emissions, and in a way, controlling your future. And it was good to hear from Lochie, because net zero is increasingly achievable and financial. Put the hyperbole aside, I think the reality is that most people want to do the right thing. Most people want to have a clean future and to use clean energy and to make their businesses run cleaner. I think the biggest challenge here is that most people don't know where they are. And it's very hard to improve your situation unless you can baseline yourself. And hence, NetNada is here and a big part of our business. It gives you that baseline, so you now know you've measured what can be measured, and you now can create a strategy about doing something about it. I empathize with many businesses. Many of you online today, you'll be trying to work out what this all means. I would say NetNada is a great place to start. And, whilst business needs to make money and be viable, that's what Smart Commercial has built its reputation and history on. I've got two stories about clients who, with regards to this. So one of my very favourite clients, very successful Australian business, global company, listed on the stock market. One of their major investors pulled out $100 million of investment sold their stock overnight. The owner called up, or the CEO called up this major investor and said, "Hey, I just noticed that you just dumped our stock." And the investment manager said, "Yeah, well, we could see that you weren't doing enough about your emissions. So we had to take our money to other companies who were." So it's really interesting to see key drivers are coming from share markets, boards, and financiers. And then some of those drivers are also customers and markets. So another one of our customers is a packaging company. We're undertaking a large solar system to achieve 35% of their energy from solar on their roof. They were able to write into their tender that this was a strategy that they were taking to decarbonize, and they won a major contract with a soft drinks company. The value of those two situations far exceeds the investment it would have taken for those businesses to head in the right direction. And solar, as we know, is already extremely financially attractive, and batteries only in the last year have become financially attractive. And yeah, so that's what the future is going to look like. It's going to be crazy. I believe it's going to be volatile. But at the end of the day, as a business, you need to take care of yourself. There's a lot you can do. It's actually surprisingly easy. And let's all hang on for the ride. I hope that's answered some questions that would be in people's minds, but we're no longer rubbing sticks together to create fire. We're no longer relying on steam engines or now electricity turbines or even nuclear fission. We're in the most interesting phase of energy, which is a static energy that comes from the sun. It's surprisingly boring because nothing moves. It's just silicon absorbing sunlight and batteries storing that energy for use. But it's fast and it's cheap and it's clean. And that makes it a very exciting time to be alive. Thank you for your time.
If you have time to stay on, I will share some of the questions. Firstly, Wayne, you had your hand up. Did you have a question for Huon?
Oh, no, thanks, Lauren. No, it was really just a very quick comment, to be honest, which is just to reinforce what Huon said, which is fantastic, which is all about that this is all about taking control of your own destiny. That's phenomenally important. And what I would say is that smart commercial solar are really good at this stuff. And so really encourage businesses to reach out up to Huon and to Lauren and look at how you can best maximise the opportunities and reduce your power bills. Thanks. And emissions as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I have a question here. While I've got you, Wayne, I'll ask this question, which was directed at you. Does the Smart Energy Council understand the DNSPs, Energex, etc., provide the financial limitation to businesses? We really need the Smart Energy Council talking to the AER.
Yeah, just some acronyms there. The DNSPs are the energy networks. AER is the Australian Energy Regulator. We've actually got a number of the energy networks are members of the Smart Energy Council. South Australian Power Networks, Synergy, Energy Queensland and others are all key members of the Smart Energy Council. We work very closely with them and others, Essential Energy as well. But we're also finding significant challenges around the network. So increasingly the energy networks, they're finding problems with their own revenue streams as sort of solar and batteries are kind of eating their lunches. And so they're looking for new energy revenue streams. We're finding that they're increasingly trying to take control and benefit from individuals, households and businesses investing in solar and battery storage. And we've really got to get this right. We've got to find the balance between that right. I think Australians would be pretty upset if they found out that the energy networks are actually trying to take advantage and taking effectively a commission from people's own investments in home batteries. And so there needs to be a much more greater transparency about this. But the energy networks are also really important. They've got an important role to play, obviously, in our energy future. We are talking to the networks. We are talking to the energy regulator. But yes, I agree that this is a priority area.
Got a question for Huon here. This AI tech and control for playing the larger commercial solar market, so I believe that's referring to our Smart Stack product, is great. Can it or is it viable or achievable on the domestic or smaller commercial scale?
It's on the small scale, it's more difficult, but Amber Electric, which is probably my favorite retailer, is the best bet for homes. And if you've got a battery and solar at home, I would definitely be looking to Amber for my retail. They will trade your battery. The magic, I guess, or the trick with batteries is that we need to aggregate them. Typically, we're not allowed to actually trade a battery unless it's 5 megawatts dispatchable capacity or above that. So not a lot of our businesses, not a lot of our customers will have space to put in a 5 megawatt, 10 megawatt hour battery, which is probably 2 or 3 containers of batteries. So what we do is we orchestrate across multiple sites. And so we're really, we might have a 250 kilowatt hour battery in one location and 500 in another. And we stack all those up into a 5 megawatt capacity battery, which is virtually managed across the networks. And that's how we do it. Homes, a little bit more difficult. We're not a retailer and we don't want to be. So yeah, Amber does that very well.
This one's for Wayne or Huon. With network use of system costs now often forming over 50% of commercial electricity bills, can you comment on what you view as the election impacts on the drivers of network use of system costs and the outlook for them over the next 3 years? Are there any independent firms that can provide advice around this?
I might just very quickly jump in, and then I'm really keen to get Huon's comments here. The one thing I would say is kind of following what I said before, there needs to be much greater transparency in the system. Like, we should all be shining a very bright light on what makes up the energy bills and whether or not it's absolutely justifiable for those network costs to be there at that level. And I think we've all got a role to play in that, Huon.
So network costs have increased by 60% over the last 10 years. They have had to do a lot of work to build a network capable of taking a highly volatile, more renewable grid. And I do feel for the networks, the poles and wires and the transmission is extremely important if you want to have a renewable grid. Hence the renewable energy zones, which are in effect, I wouldn't use a nefarious way of thinking about it, but it is a bit of a Trojan horse in order to build more network and get bigger transmission. A big part of our problem is that, you can see negative prices in Queensland and high prices on the spot market in Victoria. And it's actually the issue is our speed of transport. And because Australia is a very big country with a very diverse geographic sort of situation, very spread out population, the speed of our network and the youth of our network is somewhat limited. I think the amount of investment required for networks has got to go up. That means the cost has got to go up, unfortunately. There is nothing in what I can see in the next 3 to 5 years that is actually going to see the costs of electricity decrease. And the networks are trying to pay for that increase in investment with less and less kilowatt hours being sold to less and less customers because more and more people have solar, which means that they're not paying for kilowatt hours coming through those poles and wires.
All right. I hear you here, Jonathan, who's commented we could have a full day minimum talking about the network and their rip-off charges. Not fair, not reasonable. I feel you. We don't unfortunately have a full day. I am going to wrap it up now. If anyone's interested in talking to us about any of the solutions we've discussed, please go via the website contact page. Please email me directly or whoever your smart representative is. We are happy to look at your business and what will be the best outcome for you at this point, given everything that's been discussed. Thank you so much for attending.